Hi everyone, today we're going to talk a little bit about this really beautiful yesterday and today card making workshop. As you can see, it makes a variety of 4 different cards, and you actually make 4 of each of those cards. The technique that is featured in this workshop is embossing and antiquing your embossing. And so today I thought I'd show you how to do that and give you some fun tips and tricks to make it a little easier. You'll notice in front of me I have an espresso pigment pad. It's not a regular dye ink pad, and the reason we're using pigment is twofold. Number one, pigment ink is great for embossing, so we can emboss with it, but we can also use it to do this really great antiquing. If you're using a Versamark pad, which we also carry for embossing, you can use that, but to save product and time, we're going to use the espresso pad for both the embossing ink and to antique. So you're going to notice also that I have this really fun stamp set. Can you see these blue pieces here? That indicates that there are dies that go with those. We call them thin cuts here at Close to My Heart. If I turn this over and open it, each of our card making workshops come with a stamp set with coordinating dies. So you can see the stamps here, and then as I move those out of the way, you can also see our dies, which come on a magnetic sheet, which is really, really handy. Okay. I'm going to lift this card up so you can see up close the silver embossing here on this card, and I'll just do a little tilting here so you can see the shine and shimmer of that silver embossing powder. Now let me lift this one up too so you can see on this card we've silver embossed, as I mentioned before, but then we've also added some of the espresso ink to antique that, and those are the 2 things I'll be demonstrating for you today. I'm going to start out with a really great tip. Whenever I'm embossing, especially small pieces like you see in this, I like to have just an extra sheet of paper on hand. It doesn't have to be a whole sheet of cardstock like what I've got here, but I would recommend that it is colored. And you'll see why in just a moment. But you can use just a small scrap of paper or whatever you happen to have on hand. And what I do with this is when I have a lot of little pieces, I'm going to turn it over and show you because I prepped a little for you in advance. I just like to lightly adhere them right here to the paper. So I have a few more to add here that we would be embossing in this workshop. So I'll just add those. Now that I've got them lightly adhered, they'll easily come right back up, but it's nice that they're put in one place for me so that I don't have to worry about them moving as I'm stamping and embossing. The next thing we want to do, we want to make sure we take our anti-static pouch and really use it on everything. That way no extra powder is going to stick to what we stamp, because the powder itself will emboss whether it's stuck to ink or not. So we want to make sure we have a nice clean stamped image where nothing else is stamping or sticking to it. So I'll just shake off a little extra powder there. And what I'm going to do next is emboss these little craft squares. I have my star on a block already. I'm also going to stamp these because this is another great tip even if you're not embossing. It's really awesome when you have a shape that you want to fit your stamp exactly in, when you have a color behind it and just ink up your stamp, you can easily see the edges of what you're stamping and center that image right perfectly onto your die cut. So the green helps me do that really well. Now that we've got all of these stamped with our pigment ink, we'll just actually move that out of the way. The next step is to add our embossing powder. And like I said, we've got these lightly adhered to the sheet so they're not going to move. And we can easily just sprinkle our powder. Now we'll just shake off this extra powder, and I'm just gonna put it right here on my guide so I can easily put it right back into the pot. I have a little extra left over. Embossing powder will last you for such a long time if you're careful to always just pour it right back in when you're done. There's another really great tip. Okay, now that we've got this all powdered up and ready to go, I'm going to grab my embossing gun and we're going to emboss these. And a couple of tips when you emboss is you don't want to hold your gun right against what you're doing because you could scorch your paper. So what you want to do is kind of wave it carefully back and forth above what you're embossing and you'll see the magic happen. So I'll just center this right here so you can see it go. Now you can see the gorgeous embossing is done. The next thing I want to do is show you how to antique. Now let's pull this card back in. As we looked before, we can see that we've added antiquing to both this little clip and the bracket. So we did add this lightly to the sheet and you can see how easily we can just lift it right off. So I'll just pull that bracket off, move this out of the way. The next thing we're going to do is use our round sponge. And I like to cut it into pieces like a pie. So we'll just cut it in half and then cut a little piece of pie for ourselves. The reason I like to do that is this little point is kind of my handle. And then I've got a nice round surface to add ink to. So I'll pull my pigment ink back into the picture here. We'll just pick up some ink here with our little pie wedge. You can see that it's nice and inky. If you're using a regular dye-based ink to do this with, you won't see the ink as much, but you'll be able to tell when you start to sponge that there's a lot of ink in there. So all we're going to do is just sponge around the edges a little bit and even up into the silver so that the silver kind of gets more of an antique look. And it's okay that I'm going a little past it too because it just looks like it's old and weathered and antiqued a little bit. And you can add more, or you can even go back and rub a little bit off before it dries if you feel like you've gotten a little more than you really wanted. And that's all there is to the antiquing of this. And you can see as we pull the cards back in, what a fun look that antique look it gives you here. We've also done the same here on this card with the star. Back to this card where we had those craft paper squares. All we did was emboss with silver, which is a really pretty look, especially on that craft, isn't it? And then this card has no embossing at all. It's all just straight stamping. So this workshop is full of treasures, technique treasures, and lots of beautiful looks. And now that you have these few little tips, you'll be ready to make your workshop in no time. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have fun stamping.